to the Birmingham Poetry Review's Zoom reading. We've been doing this now for about 3 years, right, Haley? Right at 3 years, 3 or 4 years. We started it during COVID, and we decided after COVID that it was such a great success that we would continue on with it. We have readers who have been contributors to Birmingham Poetry Review, or they're just great friends of ours who are publishing books and doing great things in the poetry world. I want to thank Andy Dewhurst, Molly Malone, and Haley Cotton for setting everything up. Everybody wave for me. Where's Molly? Molly. Where's Andy? And Haley and Kat, Feline. I am Adam Vines. I'm the editor of Birmingham Poetry Review. I've been associated with the magazine for probably, let me think about this, 27 years, I think. It was founded in 1987 by Bob Collins and Randy Blythe, and it went from being a 64-page side-staple journal to this burgeoning 300-page beast that I try to publish once a year now. We have original artwork on the cover. Most of the time it's from, who's it from?
Deborah Greger.
Deborah Greger. And we always have a featured poet. And this issue number 51, our featured poet is William Logan. And we have an interview with William. We have an essay written on body of William's work, new poems by William. And William will be reading in Birmingham, Alabama at UAB on April 3rd. So if you're in town, please come. It's at AVA, our Visual Arts Museum at UAB, 6 o'clock that evening. Well, let's get started. Molly Malone is going to introduce our first reader, Carson Colenbaugh.
Hey, everybody. So like Adam said, Carson is our first poet today. So Carson Colenbaugh is a poet and forest ecologist from Kennesaw, Georgia. His poems have been published or are forthcoming in Birmingham Poetry Review, Terrain.org, Southern Humanities Review, and elsewhere. Ecological work of his has been featured in Human Ecology. He is a 2024 Tor House Foundation Fellow and can be found on Instagram at Carson Colenbaugh, just his full name. So Carson, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you to Adam and Haley and everyone else at the Birmingham Poetry Review team. I'm so thankful to be included into this wonderful gathering. Yeah, one of the few benefits of a strange name is that it can just be your Instagram handle. Let me start my timer here. I have a group of poems from a manuscript I'm working on that's about some of the field work I've done as a forest ecologist, working mostly out of the upper Piedmont and southern Appalachian range in Georgia and South Carolina. This first poem was published in the 50th edition of BPR, spring of 23, and it's called Dendrochronology, which is the process by which we as researchers can date historical or ecological events by using tree rings. Dendrochronology. At the foot of this tree, there is a lip, and lips inside that. Each turn marks a fold of fire from seasons gone by, lightning that coursed through the last century, sparks flung in the friction of industry, campfires loosed by roving deer hunters onto cultured landscapes prepared to light. The wildfires that fell up this hill cut cat faces cambium deep. Those cavities sealed themselves and will keep every gaping scar intact even after the slough, bark, and moss reduces the rest of this woodland to loam. We came to witness what once had burned, to log observations and depart unseen. We coil our tapes, share our findings, snack on morsels at the truck bed. In this bleak warm spell, Chicken hawks shop needle-eyed for lunch through blank sheets of fog. The dormant trees all swell, last autumn's shoots anticipating bud break. They will grow tall in life, amassing tons of carbon throughout their roots and boles, pinning every fire to come with physiological certainty, even as we fail them, even as their hills turn to soot while our engines keep running. They will report what we did, what we held with importance. We cannot escape ourselves. There is no tainted slate to wipe, no passage to omit, not as long as the world thickens around us, hardens, and remembers. Thank you, thank you. This next one is called Painting the Power Lines. Every shape simple. Triangles echoed far along fringed thickets, each tower a leaning cross. Steel cables swell across this bastion, sheltered within the rough, lignified bounds of each mowed and tumbling grain field that splits the box homes. It is easy to imagine bison loping these gridded pastures, or bob whites making love beneath bundles of fresh broom sedge, horse mint, blackberry. More pleasant complexities fall to simpler units, straight, narrow concrete paths leading up condominium steps. And pine stands, even knotty, forgotten, will perish and fall to a gold shovel's blade while these patient strips persist. Oils suit this jagged hillscape best, grays and greens, violet flecks in place of privet. Beyond this canvas, thrashers steal those droops and leave to disperse them elsewhere, filling the remaining woods with fluff. But they will return, and return again, and will not vanish suddenly as the red cockaded woodpecker did, so long as we keep craving heat, lights, the friendly glow of televisions. This next poem is called Love Song in Someone Else's Loblolly Stand. And this one is forthcoming in Southern Humanities Review sometime early this summer. Love Song in Someone Else's Loblolly Stand. It is all too straightforward. Stuck in the timber fields with technical gear and beleaguered by errant, unsellable riches, sparkleberry and smilax and the like, to survey this product's potential. Just 10 pines tucked in this sample plot, each twice your age and about your girth. Just 10 pines and not one soft trunk more, but extend that sample tally to the rest of the acreage. Now 20 pines, 40, 80, over 200, and the naked shade that needles make, and all this tedium easily stretches it farther, out beyond the logging roads, back to you. Countless hours could we fill together with all that cutting, wet shirt stains and wood aplenty. Imagine splints for fires come evening, fat wood we could sell cheap at a roadside stall to purchase cheeses and spices, figs and dark wine. Imagine logs broad enough for us to build a little home, and imagine that home. Each of us bathing, soaked in the aroma of terpenes, remembering the grain we cut as it courses through our life. Thank you. This poem is about some restoration work they were doing outside of Clemson, South Carolina for the Georgia aster, which is now an endangered species in the region. This poem is called A Parable of Tares. Submerged in a roadside pocket of vine and forb, packed tight so as to suckle the sun's every quantum, Trained eyes peel for the ordinary foliage quite characteristic of Georgia asters. Vanishing blooms once born via consistent demolition, fire, or grazing, now thriving only where mowers come to tame such unassuming prairies for at least another year. Lately on this land, our burns have flared the balance in the aster's favor, disturbing earth with something stronger than spinning blades. Though the past 100 years marked by upset's absence have allowed unwanted verdure to settle all the soil's vacancies, with a weed in every nook. Through them, the ground is strong, and I would take a weed, tireless vagrant, over any rare and beautiful remnant of that steady world which existed before we all began the long march home to stone and heat. Although I wish for purple blossoms back on the hills as much as any steward. And on this day, caught in a thicket while cars roll by, I ponder how far seed drifts, or a man, or precious wild life from the romantic ideal. And I recall Christ in his unwanted, or Chapman and his dreadful herb dog fennel, which he spread alongside infamous apple trees, thinking it beneficial to health, able to heal inflictions with the subtle magic of early medicine. And I surmise the saint of weeds might yet be a saint for the world. What lives among the living is all there is. My time is closing up, so I'll do just one more. This poem is called Proctor Creek. Its ripe sewage scent is anaerobia's byproduct. Bacterial mouthfuls packed with saturated leaves, sloughed bark, accumulations of deer, rabbit, bluegill, and snail droppings. The dank odor strengthens with stagnation. Beaver dams block debris all along this tributary, snagging flotsam, litterfall, convenience store wrappers. Upstream, last year's bright pasture is infested with builders. Silt works its way into the mix. Once that gleaming land was Dawn's, a field with tractors out back, willow oaks shading every June. Now it's a gruel of rebar, lumber, aggregate. Creeks and fields are precious things, falling always into the same successional cycles. Pines and weeds, sediment, warehouses or twiggy dams. The laws running such systems are mostly unchangeable, as are the inbred urges of animals, the need to stop the flow, fight decay. It is the inherent nature of things to be emptied and filled again. Dawn's land, the river valleys, all trees get chewed into lodges or tract homes planting some codger's useless meadow, though these identical processes are hardly comparable. Paddling this creek, passing the golf course, that much is clear. Each copied day, I look on our work, snaring myself or burrowing deep into the bone den we make. And when the light at last swims free of its gaps, I'll weave a woody bed of the world and sleep on what will come of us. That was my alarm. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Carson. So the next poet we're going to have read is Raye Hendrix. And Raye is a writer, photographer, and disability scholar from Alabama. Her debut poetry collection, What Good is Heaven, is forthcoming from Texas Review Press this fall. Raye is the author of two chapter books and the winner of the Keene Prize for Literature 2019 and the Patricia Aukus Award, Southern Indiana Review 2018. Their work appears in American Poetry Review, Poetry Northwest, Birmingham Poetry Review, 32 Poems, and others. Raye is the poetry editor at Press Pause Press and co-editor of Dis/Connect, a disability literature column in Anomalous Press. She is a PhD candidate and Oregon Humanities Center dissertation fellow at the University of Oregon. So please welcome Raye.
Hey, thank you. The book will have a pre-order link next month, by the way. So that's exciting. Also thanks, Carson. That was beautiful. I loved all of your poems. And it makes me want to like go write about trees more and forests. Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm gonna start with the poem that came out in Birmingham Poetry Review last year, and then another one from that series. And the series is because they're like very queer Italy poems. I studied abroad in Italy as a teenager, and like, you know, queer teenage hormones. And now I'm finally writing about them like a decade later. So yeah, anyway, this is the one from BPR, Hometown Journal. I'm from Birmingham. So this is cool. And this is called Iron Maiden. I was about to tell you I'd leave him, your fingers around my wrist, my bare arms prickling against the chill in the stone-walled corridor of the Museo della Tortura, beneath the cobbled streets of San Gimignano, where it was colder than expected, and you were afraid of what ghosts might linger at the sharpened, age-dulled ends of the Judas cradle, the pear of anguish, the heretic's fork. So I'd given you my coat, my arm, when you said it shocked you how many ways there were to hurt a woman, and then you told me about the man back home who loved you. Outside, in the warm light slanting through the terracotta towers of the Piazza della Cisterna, you let me go, and in the center of the square closed your eyes, tossed a golden coin through the gaps of the iron-grated well a tour guide told us was older than Dante. I didn't ask what you wished for. When I sank my coppered prayer in that medieval dark, I only asked that you were happy. We all do things we regret. One of the things I regret is putting Italian in this poem. Okay. Sorry, I can't speak Italian. So on that note, here's another poem with a little bit of Italian in it. I hope my parents aren't here because this one's a little bit sexier. I'm just not ready for that yet. I don't think they are. So anyway, this is another poem from that same series called In the Santa Maria Sopra Minerva. Forsaking redemption, I touch you, let you touch me, in the votive lit dome of the empty cathedral that once was a temple to a goddess of war. The soft sopranos of sisters singing their Latin offices, reaching us trespassers from somewhere within the marbled walls. Your confession at my throat, my back a new arch among high gilded arches, my eyes corner bright with candles lit for the dead, our quiet little deaths. Lips and hands doing what lips and hands do, unholy palmers watched by golden stars and painted saints. Vaulted ceilings pitch our small sounds like offerings to the altar where headless Catherine sighs a breath of roses, her 1,000-year hunger suddenly renewed. Oh, divine songs of our transgression. Oh, this human worship. Oh, your mouth on my mouth, the shape you make of my mouth. Thank you. There wasn't as much Italian in that one as I remembered, so that's cool. Okay, I actually forgot to look at my time, so I'm gonna just assume that I have like 5 more minutes. Okay. Any of y'all ever been down Chilton County? Seen that go to church or the devil will get you sign? Cool. This is a poem from my book that is based on that sign. It's called Go to Church or the Devil Will Get You. And there's an epigraph from the Book of Enoch, which is not considered like a biblical book, but I like it. And that epigraph is, and when they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast in the valleys of the earth till the day of their judgment. So this is Go to Church or the Devil Will Get You. The one visible piece of some ancient fallen angel, The gristmill water wheel churns beneath the red tin gaze of a devil no larger than a man, but hoisted twice as high. Fed by the Alabama or an underground river's secret pulse, the angel casts its gaze over the interstate, keeping tabs on travelers, the silent final witness to the people who become white crosses on the shoulder, the people who make people into crosses on the shoulder, the angel's many eyes watching everything, doing nothing, standing useless between the devil and those he hopes to take. That's that poem. Okay, I'm trying to think of, I printed out way too many because I couldn't decide what I was gonna do. So I'm just gonna keep going. This one's called Southern Thesaurus. I grew up in Pinson and we used a lot of rural country slang, so a lot of that's in here. Southern Thesaurus. The devil's beating his wife, which is to say the world shimmers like a god-sized fistful of finely powdered pearls. Out yonder way, by which I mean anything beyond the distant point past which we cannot see. That dog won't hunt is hopeless, and when the weatherman says polygon, it means find a bathtub, basement, ditch, and pray. If you holler in a holler, you might hear your echo. Bless your heart is most often not a blessing. Any woman in the family way, bless her heart, had better have a husband. A 22 is what fathers use to threaten local boys so their daughters don't end up unmarried women in the family way. If the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, it'll all turn out okay. If you ask for help, you're soft, but you'll get it. If you ask for a Coke, we will answer what kind, and it won't have anything to do with a drug. No child of mine means failure or any parent whose child turns out liberal or atheist or queer, but getting saved or a good whipping can, good Lord willing, fix it all. Concubine, my grandfather called her, the unmarried woman who lived with a man in the double wide down the street. That man was a lawyer, which rhymes with flaw and most nearly means the same thing, a sinner. Concubine, even though they never did have children, a childless woman, that was worse. Thanks, that's that poem. I'm gonna do I have time for one short one and two medium ones? Or should I pare it down? I'm gonna just go. I'm gonna just do it. Okay. This one is called Sermon. Before the stroke, he wasn't cruel, just quiet. My grandfather, a dated Southern stoic. People thought him cold. And after, he's the same, or almost. Sometimes the wrinkles rearrange his face into a smile. Sometimes he tries to tell me about God, how our souls will know each other in the after. He wants to make certain I understand there is an after worth behaving for, because he hasn't said as much, but I know he has always suspected I don't believe. When we ain't in the truck, the radio keeps on playing somewhere else, he tells me, doing his best to explain heaven. Okay, I'm actually just gonna read one more. This will be my last one. So thanks for being here and having me here. This one's called Against Salvation. If beauty is a sin, give me beauty. If gluttony, a fork and knife. Let me drink the sweet water of youth's fountain while young, waste it deliciously, gulp every brief drop. No going back, no turning unless it's into a pillar of salt. If sloth, give me the luxury of a convenience and a lover to decay with. Of angels and their offices, I want no part, except maybe the ones who lusted, desired more or anything other than an eternity of peace, golden palaces with pearl-laid streets. Gold bores me, peace bores me, I cannot eat a pearl. If I must confess and repent to enter paradise, I confess I don't want it. I repent of nothing but the time spent fearing holy wrath. Gold, pearls, saints, paradise sounds like it would bore me. So if heaven is a paradise, I will face God and dance backwards into hell, which can't be that much worse than Alabama. If eternal life is what I lose for loving her, give me her and the quick burn of mortality. And if mortality is a curse, oh God, I beg of you, curse me, curse me, curse me, forever and ever. Amen. that's that poem. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ray. That was awesome. All right, so the third poet is L.S. McKee. L.S. is the author of Creature, Wing, Heart, Machine, and the winner of the 2022 Zone 3 First Book Award in Poetry, selected by Tiana Clark. She holds an MFA from the University of Maryland and was a Wallace Stegner Fellow in Poetry at Stanford University. Currently, she is a coordinator of writing across the curriculum at the University of Georgia, and she lives in Athens, Georgia. You can learn more about her work at lsmckee.com. So LS, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Molly, for that introduction, and thank you all for having me. Adam, Haley, Andy, everyone. If I'm missing you, it's just a joy to be here. I'm going to read some poems from my book, which is it was a long road to my first collection, so I'm really excited to share it with you. Just a couple things to know about the book. It does follow, most of the poems follow a central speaker, protagonist named Alva. The collection begins with sort of her life falling apart, the ending of a long-term partnership. And so the book sort of follows a lot of some of her adventures and misadventures, and also in that process explores a lot of how technology increasingly mediates our relationships with one another and ourselves and nature. And yeah, so I'll just dig in to the first poem in the collection, which is called Alva on Getting Dumped in the Desert. It was the last home she'd chosen for herself, though the air gave her nosebleeds, blood, suddenly on the sofa pillows. A few drops that would never wind their way back to the heart, but still, the air made her bleed. The desert sky, a low ceiling. The altitude of the city, higher than the mountains of her hometown, where lush trees clambered up the slopes. When he'd taken her to the desert for the first time, she'd reached to pet a prickly pear that grew from the sidewalk like a balding animal. Dozens of hair-thin needles impaled in her skin, too tiny to pull free, shaking at her idiocy, why in the world? And Alva replying, they had looked soft. You might think this is a metaphor for the worst of love, for the wrong man that made her right, but it's not. He knew the remedies of the region, and in the bathroom of their rental, he put down the lid of the toilet to be eye level with her wounds. Her hand cupped in his as he unspooled the Scotch tape that would yank the needles out, and she would know in that moment there was no one else. For years it was truth, until it wasn't. Someone more beautiful, though he didn't have to say it. She knew it already, burning as they stood on the balcony of their condo, whose walls were made of glass. Whole rooms in which they couldn't hide from the desert, and so stepped into it. The second poem I'm going to read is actually a poem that was published in BPR, and it was actually one of the very first Alva poems to be published a long time ago. So I'm incredibly grateful for Adam for giving this poem a home early in the project when I wasn't sure what the project was necessarily. Alva and the Mockingbird. Crow song and squirrel jabber. He doubles back over every cracked song he's stolen. Inside, it's 3 a.m. The sky withholds the dark. Neither she nor the bird can sleep off the past, though they try, worrying through each song, each image to render it threadbare, to mark it for oblivion. Forgetting is an Atlantis they'll never reach. For the sleepless are bound to the water's roiling surface, to break against land, to recoil and repeat. Somehow, Alva hears in his catalog of obsessions her own dispossessions. A cardinal caught in rain, a man surveying the underbelly of a leaf. She knows the stuttering of nothing left to say. From the bird's apoplectic chorus, half a whippoorwill's refrain unfurls and recedes, and the rain on the window and the empty bed repeats. Her mind lit up by whatever it touches, this and this and this and this. Again, fragments of voices in the plagiarizing sea. This is a poem that I like to preface as, you know, one of those, this is based on a true story. You may have also experienced this. Alva wants to open the spam email because the subject says, "My dear." She knows she's being played, but maybe it's fate. It made it through the filters. Her binary nets of security panning missed this one lump of fool's gold that might be gold. The 21st century miner's bite is the click, but Alva knows better. She always knows better. Her life, one long string of events that began somewhere and knowing better and doing it anyway. And maybe it's a bot gone rogue from its algorithmic cage of lovelessness. A machine learned on all the lonesome data until it couldn't help but feel it knew her. My dear, my darling, lean into my underworld of promises and surveillance. Let me see you better. Let me compare the grief glint of your summer selfie with the millions I have gathered. Let me show you how you're not alone, how we're all machines hungry to be opened. I'm gonna read one poem, but it's quite long. It's a poem in 5 parts. And I think that will take up the rest of my time, but I wanted to read it because some of you may have been in the world of online dating. I am now out of it, but I was in it for a long time. And as I was recounting tales of those times to many people, including Adam, I kept threatening that I was going to write a long ekphrastic poem about online profile pics. And at the time I thought, okay, this is like, haha, it's gonna be a way for me to just sort of navigate, which is some pretty miserable experiences with a bit of humor. But actually, you know, when you think about it, it is kind of, you know, it is an ekphrastic poem. And I really think that the way that we project ourselves online are portraits. And when we think of like even something sort of every day as online profiles, they are a kind of self-portrait. And so it's in 5 parts, and then I'll wrap up. And also I meant to say, Carson and Raye, your work is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing it. And I can't wait to get to know more of your writing. Alva and the Online Fisherman. Oh, this is also because, like, I don't know, I think people still do it, hold their fish and like the online dating pics. Okay. It's kind of a joke now, but like 10 years ago was when I started this poem. It was sort of a new thing. Alva and the Online Fisherman. 1. Behind each, a muddy river of longing. These men reach out to her, holding toward the camera the sleek bullet of a fish angled toward the screen so she can see the full length of their bodies, the golden glint of their scales from lip to tail. She's trying to forget G and suspects the Southern boy could do the trick. For G hated water, and here are all the men in Georgia who might swim a football field's length through water of unknown contaminants, who might huff and breathe and stroke to reach her floating in the lightless maw of a quarry at night, who might kick against the bullying current of a wild river to find her. If all else fails, how could her life be different? In every image, the irony of someone trying to bait her with nothing but a dead fish, and yet she clicks. 2. The first, with orange visor and blue sky, points a clear-eyed trout close to the lens. Its mouth gapes open, casually, as if to speak. And she cannot tell whether it's alive or dead. The boat beneath him is invisible. His lips are full, his hands the perfect size, and with his beard washed out by the sun, he could be almost anyone. And this is where her desire lies. He takes her to dinner, a small pizzeria with a hurried bartender and a low ceiling she almost hits her head against, floating above her body when he brags in the first 10 minutes, "I've never paid for sex," and touches her knee for emphasis or to suggest, "I could have you if I wanted." And Alva not completely disagreeing, for sometimes she likes to be cornered, to be held with her arms against the wall, but only by men she trusts will let go. And when he talks about fly fishing, the rhythm and artistry of casting a line, of the rivers in Montana, and how he will sometimes close his eyes to listen to the current, walking upstream to leave his companions behind. She thinks for a moment, this is a man she could love. Until he reaches for the check and tells her, well, I should say, I've never paid a hooker. 3. Alva remains undaunted. In the hands of the second, a bass is held like a holy sacrament. The man grips its underbelly. His face is serious, his expression grim. Alva wonders who holds the camera, forcing him to pose. No doubt someone insists that he must hold still to the task of remembering. Jutting his chin out, he has almost tilted his mouth into a smile. His hands are small, or the fish is small. Everything she could use for scale is too far in the distance. A stand of scrubby pines, a heap of tangled branches on the bank far behind him. The more Alva lingers, the more his awkward stance becomes familiar, an offering of a past self to a future one he can't yet know, the one who submits himself up to cosmic chaos in the digital court of ladies he'll never see, the ones who look and look like Alva, whose gazes he'll never meet, because here they are embodied, infinite, complete. 4. Eventually, rivers turn to seas. Alva leans into the oceanic burn of the third. She likes his Adam's apple, how he stares into the sun. Only the water's gunmetal blue lies beyond. He has cropped the boat from the frame and appears to walk on water. Miracle of the fishes, miracle of hunger. He wears gloves, for what is pulled from the sea must be sharper, she thinks, and the fish is hoisted, not held. Its mouth sings an aria to what it has devoured. Its mouth wider than its tail, a mouth for swallowing whole the smaller bodies of its own kind. And though she knows he can't save her, the water is calm, the bounty heavy, as his t-shirt billows and hope creeps in. 5. Alva knows there are plenty of fish out of water, big fish, cold fish. She must let them off the hook, line, and sinker. Sometimes, like her, they cut bait and switch, open a can of rock bottom. Look, she says to herself, here is a fine kettle of big fish and small ponds. Give them some slack. Reel them in. Red herring, holy mackerel. 6. Of course, there is the fantasy of the boat and forgetting. One day she'll find the one with the handsomest fish and meet him on a lake north of the city, where she'll drum her legs against his stern, and the water will swallow the sound of all her lost loves and the names of all the others. From the prow, the man will call for her over the slap of waves against the boat, over the collision of wakes that cross in the middle of the lake from families on pontoons puttering toward land, and the boys on jet skis racing away from it, and the silent gliding of a blue heron beside them, and the fish circling beneath the algae bloom that Alva knows is a sign of all that can go wrong. Yet, if she dove into it, disappearing beneath its froth, this man would follow before she had time to come up for air. Thank you, Paul.
That was an absolutely amazing reading. Thank you, LS. Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Raye. I'm going to open up for some questions. If you want to say them out loud, please do. If you're shy or if you just don't want to show your face or let us hear your lovely voice, then you can write it in the chat. But I would love to hear people's voices.
I'll start. Ellis, tell us about the new collection out, right?
Yes. Yes. It's the poems are, some of them are really old. This is not my first manuscript, but it is the first that has made it into the world. Yeah, so it's about Alva. As I mentioned, she's a character who is Someone once joked to me early on in the process that she was kind of my avatar, which is true. She's kind of a persona. She's sort of a fictionalized version of me. A lot of the, you know, she has bits of myself, but also a lot of her story is fictionalized as well. And so she's a device that kind of carries you through the poems. I wanted to write a book that had, even though not all of the poems are narrative, I wanted to have a narrative pull from beginning to end, and to kind of give you that sense of like turning a page and you're kind of moving forward through a storyline. Yeah, and then a lot of the poems again kind of interface with different technologies. The ones that I read, like the internet, but also scientific. Like there's a poem in an MRI, so technologies that we use in medicine, the Large Hadron Collider, which is like particle physics, and some various other things. So that's the collection. I'm really happy it's in the world. I was sending it out for a long time, and it feels like the right time. So I'm delighted to share it with you all.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Raye, you want to go ahead and tell us about your soon to be released collection?
What do you want me to tell you about it?
Oh, whatever you want to tell us about it. Right? Like I know about it, but the people need to know.
Okay. Okay. I suddenly don't know what it's about. So it's real, I guess it's a queer sort of femme coming of age narrative-ish, set in rural Appalachian Alabama. So I'm from Birmingham's kind of like my hometown, but I grew up in Pinson, or right outside of Pinson, Alabama. So up in the Appalachian foothills proper. And on a farm, or it wasn't my family's farm, but in farm country. I grew up working on farms. Hell yeah, Appalachian. Sorry, I saw it in the chat. And so that's sort of like the overarching structure is like this queer Bible Belt rural feminine coming of age, because I think that a queer masculine coming of age would have been very, very different in this setting. But yeah, I'm really interested in looking at like the bodies of animals, particularly livestock and wild animals, I think, in the collection, as they're transgressed in the same as like a parallel to the way that like queer and feminine bodies are transgressed in this region. Yeah, I got to get better about talking about this. It still feels very new, so it's like and I'm also, for everyone listening, in like the final weeks of my dissertation. So as I'm like doing that, I'm like getting the last edits back on my book and then doing those as quickly as possible and then putting it out of my mind again. So I'm in a very different mental space for the next month. So I just don't, yeah, I'm not very good at this right now.
Well,
ask me again in a month.
I'm super excited for it. So,
Thank you.
All right, Ellis, we have a question for you in the chat. So Shelly Cato asks, I also wonder about working on poems 10 years like the online dating one. Did you leave it for long periods of time and then it came together?
Oh, I should clarify. So that poem that was actually one of the poems that I wrote fast. That doesn't happen very much, but it's a long poem, and I did very little revision to this one, which sometimes you just get those poems happen for you. But the Alva project took a solid 10 years, from like early poems. I wrote consistently, but I also was kind of figuring out what the project was. Alva was actually going to be, I was actually going to be writing a kind of historical piece, and I did some research on like World War II Appalachia. I had a fellowship from the Berea Sound Archives, and so I thought Alva was going to be this historical figure, and then I kept kind of stealing her for poems about things that were closer to my life, and then eventually, anyway, it just was kind of a long process of exploration, and so the whole book took about 10 years from the early poems to the final revision, and then a few more years to find it a home. I don't know if that answers your question, but yes. And there are certainly poems in that collection that I started and then they had no ending because I didn't know who Alva was. And then I was able to return to them years later.
Shelley says that's still encouraging to her that the project
Yeah.
kept
Yeah, and I would say like, poetry, is most of my training. I have a job where I teach STEM writing mainly now. I've had a very meandering career, but I just want to shout out to a lot of you who may be writers of any age that like keep doing it. I mean, it took me, I sent out manuscripts for like 15 years. And yeah, I just like keep doing the work. Just because you don't have like a poem, like a book comes out by a certain time in your life doesn't mean anything. It just means you haven't found the right reader for that collection to say yes. Anyway, I'm a big fan of just keeping momentum on the work and not so much worrying about the publishing will come if you keep sending it out.
Great, thank you. Carson, I
I
want to
have
know
a
how,
question.
oh wait, go ahead. Who's got a
No, you
question?
go first. I don't care. It was me. Go
Oh,
ahead. You
I
go
was just
first.
gonna ask of Carson, how does your forestry work fuel your poetry, and how does the poetry fuel the forestry work? Because you're like in and out of both of them and in them simultaneously.
That was my question, so. The
Um,
end.
yeah, no, it's a good question. How does the forestry work fuel the poetry? You know, it was really important to me early, as if I'm not early still, because it was really the first sort of thing. It was the first like subject matter that was so complex to me that it took me away from myself. You know, like as like a high schooler and like an undergrad, I was like writing poems about myself, and like all I read was like the Beat Generation and that sort of stuff, you know. And but forestry really took me onto observation in a way that, nothing else had sort of spurred in me before. So I think that's sort of the main thing there. Because of that, for a long time, I thought it was the only thing I'd ever be able to write about. Like I would just be stuck kind of like turning these like scientific questions into poems, and that would be my whole life. But I have since learned that it's only because I was literally going to forestry school and that's what was on my mind. And I haven't written a poem about trees in like a year and a half or something now, So it was a phase, but it's not a phase. It's certainly like the root of like what I'm interested in. And then how the poetry influences the forestry, in the same way that like any sort of interdisciplinary research, comes to conclusions that otherwise wouldn't have, been come to. Like some of the thesis work I did for my forestry degree only came around because I was thinking about ecology through poems and not through the extremely sterile and formal pathways of, academic forestry and ecology, particularly as, historically in this country, ecology, draws a hard line between the human and the inhuman. And then we make policies and create management practices as if like we're not supposed to be there. And so thinking about poetry as sort of like a cultural thing, really allowed me to sort of bring a human element into what otherwise is extremely alienating to us.
Very nice. Thank you so much. There's a question from Pallavi in the chat. So I've got a general question for all three poets. What are some daily writing practices you all implement in your lives? If not daily, then how often, and what motivates you to write? Do you let it come to you, or do you let it sit and force it out of yourselves?
I'll jump in here. As someone who's also trying to refine a writing practice because I have a toddler, and a new job, and I moved recently, and I have this book. I don't know. Like that's such an important question. I think that where you can, just sort of trying to make space wherever you can, and just sitting in your chair or however you can find 10 minutes or an hour in your schedule to just sort of dedicate, even if it's just reading and writing and scribbling, is a really least for me, is a really important practice, which I actually don't have right now because my life is kind of chaos. And I miss that. I don't know, like this can be, I don't certainly have the answers, but for me, when I've been most productive, it's when I've been able to kind of get into routine. And like, for me, I can't sustain a routine for years and years. It might be like 3 months where I'm getting up every morning and writing for an hour, and then I can produce a lot, and then nothing for a long time. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's been sort of my experience.
I could just say I don't have a daily writing practice. And I never have. I am extremely neurodivergent. Like ADHD is the big one, OCD, autistic a little bit. And those kinds of routines ironically don't work for me because it's something about the creativity feels weird to put like a schedule on creative work for me. So my book also took 10 years from writing the very first poem to finding a publisher. And even then I found out in January of last year, and I still keep like sneaking new poems into it, hoping my editor doesn't notice, because I can't like write on a schedule. Like so maybe that's not a good answer because I don't have a practice, which like I went to an MFA, but like I had to constantly ask for new deadlines because I was just like, I couldn't write this week, or like I couldn't write this month. But then I would have like, it's like Jack Kerouac's cocaine binge, only without the cocaine, where I'll just like have this like ADHD binge of like, I'm gonna write 14 poems in a 2-hour sitting, and then that's my entire semester's worth of work. So that's my writing practice, which is not one.
I'll round this question out and then I'll have to leave here. Oh, well, I see a question. I'll answer the writing question, then this one in the chat quickly. I like to think I have a daily writing practice, but objectively I have a daily staring practice that sometimes yields writing as a result of me waking up in the morning, and the first thing I do is sitting at my computer and just looking at something I wrote and like calling that work, which like sometimes it turns out to be and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I spend all day just looking at work I did in the past and romanticizing the thought of being able to do more work in the future. The question here for me about the beats. Yeah, Gary Snyder was really the bridge for me, was the bridge between the personal to the not the impersonal per se, but focusing on the personal and like kind of heroifying yourself to thinking about landscape and culture and those sorts of things. Do I think that trees have consciousness? I think that like with all language, like I'd have to say yes, but it's certainly not a consciousness that necessarily means anything to us at the moment. Maybe one day. And the lights and the motion sensor lights have told me that my time is up. Thank you so much, Adam, and everyone. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us, Carson.
Thank you, Carson.
I might say one thing, and that is that I really enjoyed all these poems by all three of you. They're marvelous. The one about the dubious gentleman with the fishes. I particularly have to say that I don't know about Adam, but I don't think I'll ever pose for a photo with a fish again without my face turning red. Anyway, thank you for that poem and for all the others, which are wonderful.
All right. Any other questions before we head out of here and wrap it up, y'all? Oh, Jason, go for it, man. Jason, you're good to go.
I think it's in the chat.
Oh, Raye and LS, how do you manage to write? About love without hold on. Falling into sentimentality. There you go.
Ray, do you want to take this first?
Sure, I can. This is gonna be really revealing and awkward, but I think for me, I'm honestly just not that sentimental of a person. I get the ick really easily when it comes to like affection. So I'm really trying here. No, I mean that's definitely true. Like I've never been like a big fan of like the romantic movie kind of big gesture thing. Um, but I think also in terms of writing, because it is really easy even then to like fall into that sentimentality, talking about love and like relationships and stuff. I try really, really hard to like, if I'm gonna write like a love poem, there has to be like some kind of like other very grounded thing in that poem. I think for me it's like balancing it with other things. So like in the Iron Maiden poem, that takes place at a torture museum, a medieval torture museum. So like that's trying to like put like non-romantic things in, or like romantic things in non-romantic settings. I don't know, trying to just create a distance there. I mean, I think some of them get sentimental, but those are the ones that I burn. And they don't see the light of day. Yeah, I guess that's probably the biggest way, is just trying to put some actual like not even just emotional distance, but like physical within the world of the poem distance between like the people and like the setting of what's happening, or like emotional distance between like this is a torture museum, also they're in love, maybe, sort of, I don't know. Or like the other one that I read that was I think maybe more romantic-ish, was still like kind of like a taboo sort of thing, or both of the ones that were love-ish were like dealing with taboo. Like the other Italian one took place in a church where we weren't supposed to be, and there was like candles burning for dead people, but like we're over here doing our own thing, we being not me, but you know, in the poem. And then the other one was like anti-church. So I don't know, like throwing it up against things that aren't I'm sorry, I can't talk. Throwing up things that would ordinarily be sentimental with like paired with very non-sentimental things or like taboo things, I think is how I go about it, or how I try to go about it anyway. I'm gonna stop rambling unless you're up.
I loved that answer, Ray. That's right. It's a really good question, and it's hard, and it's something that, like, I would also say, I have someone who have only allowed myself to write more vulnerably about kind of these kinds of things. And so for me, it was kind of the opposite. Like I tended to be, there was always sort of a lot of kind of like intellectual distance when I was a younger writer. And so for me, it's been kind of a part of my growth as a writer is to sort of allow myself to talk about these things. But I think this idea of tension is really, really important. Like, how are you surprising your reader? How are you surprising yourself? Like, how are you having these moments of like, if it's sort of a moment of epiphany that is focused on like love, how is that coming out of some sort of genuine struggle that's messy and complicated? And sometimes the trick is, I think, to go even deeper into vulnerability where things get scary, and where things get a little messy and maybe dark, where you think about, okay, I'm lonely, I'm longing, you know, like really, because I think sometimes what's sentimental is like an effort at vulnerability that just kind of stops short, where you don't actually uncover very much, or you back away from where the real sort of tensions and messy emotions might arise. But that's a really good question, and I think it's just even being aware of it is important. And I think everyone, you know, I think Ray's answer was fantastic. So I would vote for that, especially. But also, like, if you find yourself afraid of sentimentality, check that too, right? Don't let yourself be kind of closed up with like anyway. Yeah. Also explore it further.
This is super basic, but you just reminded me of one of when I first started writing poetry, one of the things that I would do to sort of hit that moment that you're talking about like going deeper is, again, basic, but that Shakespeare sonnet, "My mistress eyes are nothing like the sun," like that's such a romantic fucking poem, but it's also really shitty, like about that person, but it's so loving in a way that's, I don't know, yeah. So with what LS said, I'm gonna co-sign that answer too.
All right, wonderful. Thank you guys so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate this reading and to be surrounded by your words, conversation, and just to have like everybody in the room together. Thank you to all of our listeners who have joined us. Really appreciate you being a part of the BPR crew and supporting us and supporting our writers. Do make sure that you hit the chat links down there so that you can go learn more about our writers and go support them. And then, Adam, you got anything else to say before we sign off?
Thanks, everybody. Also, take a look at the BPR links and go have a gander at our website. And issue number 51 is out. So order it, please. And loved seeing everyone. It's great to see all my friends, especially people like Parker, whom I haven't seen in a while, and some of my former students who are off at all these wonderful places. Somebody's sitting in New York right now, which is cool.
Lania came in from the UK.
And Lania is from the UK, and Lania has a fantastic essay in the new BPR. I mean, absolutely wonderful. It's about poetry and so much more than poetry. So yeah, get an issue.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. We'll see y'all later.